Go ahead, let me know when you're ready.
It's ready.
Mendo's back there, Yana. Yeah, it's very expensive for what it is. I didn't know.
Half of them are older than me, and I'm not that young.
Okay?
We like
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's meeting of the Holmdel Township Zoning Board of Adjustment, this being a regular meeting of today, Wednesday, December 1st. Call to order.
In accordance with Open Public Meeting Act NJSA 10-410, I hereby announce that adequate notice of this meeting was provided in a notice dated January 6, 2021, and amended August 13, 2021, was sent to the Asbury Park Press, the Two River Times, and posted on the bulletin board of Town Hall, filed in the clerk's office, and posted on the township website. Roll call, Loretta?
Ms. Avron?
Here.
Mr. Blumenthal?
Here.
Mr. Buckalino? Ms. Campus?
Here.
Mr. Hearn?
Here.
Mr. Obanatopoulos?
Here.
Mr. Pesci?
Here.
Ms. Kalor? And Mr. Latif?
Here.
Let us seek Mr. Latif for all matters on tonight's agenda, place of the Mr. Buffalino. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance and say, standing thereafter, for a moment of silence, for honor of police and military and first responders. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. The first item is an executive session. Ask for a motion to go into a closed session for matters of personnel and potential litigation.
Motion?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, we'll be going upstairs where we can talk privately. Hopefully this won't take more than 15 or 20 minutes, and then we'll be coming down here and continuing with our agenda. Yeah.
Can I have some? No. Oh, really? Oh, it's nice of you. No, I just had dinner. I had my tea. But if I start slumping a little bit, just throw some water at me. I have 4 granddaughters. They're not as old as 11, they're 8, 7, 3, and 3. So the 2 older ones are getting their shots. And my wife, she's very pushing on it. The older one is just behind the younger one, who's 7. And that's because the parents of the 7-year-old are both physicians, so they and both of them, yeah, it's they were in hospitals every night, and they were, and she's in Europe, so I can't believe it. Be careful. My wife and I were very lucky. And we, all places that they put in the hall, they had like a yeah, he was there, last Sunday. They didn't have a lineup for the so I'm impressed you have Robert's Rules of Order.
Yes. I've been here 35 years.
Because in hearings where they're invited, they don't observe, they make mistakes. If you can get it fair.
Share point sign, they just clicked on it, just said, oh, we got
Pardon? No, not necessarily. I was thinking what we're doing is that he just brought this. We only have one copy. I'm going to take 1 through 5 and mark this as 6. And we're not going to put this one in now. Yeah, so if you could take out, so it's just 1 through 5, and we can do all of this, unless we can get a picture of it. Yeah, we could do it. And let me, I'm going to mark that page 6. You know, I can't mark that 6.
Yeah. Yeah.
You probably already had everything.
Actually, Jeff has copies of 1 through 6. So this will be superfluous, but that's all right. Okay, so what I'm looking for now is a plan. Yeah. I'm looking for a different plan that Larry showed. Larry showed two. It's not this one. Oh, wait a second. Maybe that's it.
Hal took all of the dates, I was like updated this whole site.
Can I have a motion to go back into public?
Motion?
A second? Second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, we're back in the public. Moving on to item 2 on the agenda. You want to read that one?
Yep. 470 Red Hill Road, Dementia Center, preliminary final site plan number 2020-6, block 49.02, lots 40.40Q and 41 in the R40B zone. Applicant seeks a use variance to create an assisted living residence which will be a facility for those suffering from dementia for 105 residents. The facility will consist of a state-of-the-art residential memory support program that will house a variety of innovative programs and building design concepts, including an assessment program, educational services, and extensive community outreach and support.
The main item we're going to be addressing tonight is to put on the record observations from the site visit. We do have notes from our secretary that record the site visit that was held on November 6th. 6 board members were present, 3 representatives of the applicant, and several members of the public were present. Although the site visit is an official meeting of the board, it is not technically a hearing, and any observations or thoughts about what was observed on the site visit need to be put on the record at a public hearing such as now. Just to note, we have had several previous public hearings. This is a continued public hearing. I'll begin with a couple of my observations. We gathered in the parking lot and mostly followed the proposed perimeter emergency access road. We also noted where the buildings are to be. I noted that although one drives by the property on Van Scoik, one sees some steep slopes. However, the proposed area for development is relatively flat, and that the access road, which was originally not go all the way around, I thought might be not do so because of the steep slopes, in fact, was marked all the way around and can actually go around. Since the intent is for this emergency access road to only be used for emergencies, I anticipate, and I leave it to the applicant to comment, that it will only have limited use. Suggest perhaps that the entrances should somehow be gated and signed so as to in fact limit the use. And also suggest that if there is in fact limited use, it would be appropriate to consider constructing this from some, what I'll call gascrete, but I believe that's a trade name or a brand name, but some sort of materials which can handle the weight of the vehicles, but yet be pervious, so as to reduce instead of increasing the overall impervious coverage. Unrelated to the site visit, but having seen some best practices presentations from ANJAC and the state recently, there appear to be now new materials that concretes and asphalts that are pervious. So I suggest that these also be considered for, say, the extensive walks internal to the site, to the extent that it can retain water on the site and not have to have it go off-site will be beneficial, I would suspect, for the applicant as well. Second, I also noted that the majority of the site is open fields with coarse grasses. Various animals were in pens. I guess they probably kept them penned up while we were there so that nobody got booted by a goat or whatever. And thus, in general, the property has a rural appearance, which I suggest should be preserved. And part of the plan seems to do that. We should consider the Hopbrook Development off of Holmdel Road, just north of Holmdel Village. This was a residential cluster development with a preserved farm, which is visible from Holmdel Road. So as you drive past, you pretty much see the farm and you don't see the houses behind it. There is some limited landscaping along the road. It's done in clusters so that as the plants are in clusters, leaving spaces in between so as when drive by, one can continue to see the farm fields and maintains the overall rural appearance of Holmdel. So I suggest maybe consider doing something similar here to maintain with clustered native vegetation or whatever, and that'll also be considered because some of the, around the perimeter, some of the stormwater facilities as to how that gets done. Just question, and this doesn't have to be answered right now, the site plan does show a barn for animals. how many animals, what kind, and will those animals be around the perimeter or not? So to what extent will that help maintain the current appearance of this property so that it maintains the rural aesthetic of the property? Please, those are a couple of my observations and comments, and anyone else who would like to make any comments or observations about what they saw on the site visit. Go ahead,
Yes,
Valerie.
my observation is that the buildings were a lot closer to the residential neighborhood than I felt they were going to be based on the site plan. So actually walking the area and having everything laid out, I have a concern just about how close it falls to the residential development. So I'm wondering if adjustments can be made to the plans to move things further set back from the residences.
That's it.
Yeah.
Dimitri?
I too were on the site and walked the whole property. I agree with Valerie, the distance, once you see the markers where the buildings were, especially towards the residence, seemed very close. And the elevation is higher than the residence home, so I know they're proposing shrubbery, but you may even consider having some sort of a berm to raise it up to hide a little bit more. Even there was a fence there that was in disrepair going all along the residence property, which was unsightly to me. I also observed from the parkway, I went across the street and looked across where the flags were and see that this buildings that they're going to put up, and I know in the past I referred it to a stockade, will be very visible and affect the view of everybody coming into Holmdel and Middletown off the parkway. As far as having pastures or keeping it look natural, I don't see any way that it's going to look that way once this goes in. So unless there's something done all along the perimeter of the complex that they're putting in to screen it, including even the colors of the buildings, which are a dark color of some sort, which to me will stick out and seen from miles away. You'll know it's there. So the idea is here we're in our town, we've seen farmland there, we've seen animals there, and if we're getting asked to do a variance, we need to have that property disappear so we don't see buildings there. So when I did the walk around the property, I noticed that it was going to be even more prevalent that would be required to do that versus what we saw on paper.
Others have any comments? Anthony?
Yes, so Dimitri touched on something that I was going to mention. I was also shocked to see how close the actual structures were to the houses in the surrounding area. The elevation is much higher when you're walking the property than what a picture or an illustration can explain. I think, from an elevation standpoint, regardless of whatever trees are planted there, if it's to grade, I don't think it would ever block what you would ultimately see in the development. So certainly a berm of some sort, 5 or 6 feet, that runs along that stretch of the homes that are north of the property, I would certainly like to see a decent size caliper tree planted and enough of them that would restrict the visibility of staring at the roofs of possibly the structures that do seem very close, once again, to those houses. The other thing that I was curious to know, originally the basins that border Red Hill Road, where it ultimately turns into Van Schoik, they seemed pretty close to the street, and those basins were detention basins? That's what was proposed. So why would they be detention and not retention? Like, why do we have to stare at an empty hole that never looks good? Why couldn't it be something that possibly is similar to what they did on Laurel Avenue? What's the development that they have right on the street as soon as you pass the train trestle? Actually has like a fountain.
The
Commons, there you go.
The retirement community over there.
So where they have a fountain, it keeps the water movement. It actually aesthetically looks 1,000 times better than just a hole in the ground. Along with the fact that I'm not sure why there's
Well,
not a
it's
tree
across
line.
Across from TD Bank.
Right, that's correct. I'm not sure why there's not also a line of trees around the complete property where it joins Van Schoik and Red Hill Road. You know, I just, to me, to keep the aesthetics, you know, farm fence, trees that ultimately border the complete property, possibly an evergreen that, you know, will give you at least some of the blocking of the structures that are behind there, I think would be a tremendous improvement to the plan. For me, those were the biggest standouts.
Other comments? Kate, Bob?
I,
there.
Yeah, I know.
board
Yeah,
members?
you
No,
were
I'm just
there.
saying I wasn't at this.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah.
He wasn't in either.
I have a few comments just from a planning just keep it to planning perspective. If Bob has anything to chime in with engineering.
Talk closer to the mic.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Didn't hear you. Yes, it is on. Okay, so I was also present at the site visit, and I think that, the things that I just wanted to draw attention to. Let me just get my letter that some of these is enumerated in the letter that I had dated yesterday. The first thing is that seeing the condition of the trees along the rear property line, I think, the way they were shown on the plans and the way that they did appear in some pictures, that tree line is not, it's not in great shape. And I think, the requirement of the ordinance at section 54G is that the buffer should be a solid and continuous landscape screen to be planted by the owner to conceal parking and loading areas, which is not an issue in the back, but eliminate the glare of vehicle lights throughout the year and camouflage the building from the abutting residential areas. So, I think in light of seeing those trees back there, and the buffer is technically the distance that is required, but I would like to see, more testimony from the applicant on whether they can comply with that section of the ordinance. And that just one more thing is that also relating to buffers is there's very limited landscaping proposed along by the parking area and near the main entrance, and the same section would apply there. And so, again, more testimony should be provided on that.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay. Bob?
Yeah, I have a couple of comments because Dimitri and Valerie and Anthony hit on most of my concerns. But the one major concern I have is the emergency access to the site, the additional entrance and exit way. I feel that that's very important in this development, in the fact that even if it's one time that there's an accident right in front of this development, that there would be no way to get into the development if there was an emergency at the same time. So that's the only other concern I had outside of what has already been testified or mentioned. And the other thing would be that from a landscaping perspective, that they provide more landscaping around, and it was in the notes here, foundation, just a typical section of the foundation plantings that would be proposed for each of the units.
Yeah, I mean, the emergency access thing is something I think that was mentioned in perhaps your first engineering letter as well.
Yes.
And I think what you're concerned about is the current main entrance is at the light, which is also the exit from the Parkway at 114.
Correct.
I have no idea what the accident records or incidence rate at that intersection is. But if there is a significant accident at that intersection, that would then potentially impact access to the site. And that's what you're concerned about, that if then, say, somebody needed a 911 call from the facility, that somehow they should be able to get past the accident, whatever it is, and get into the site and be able to do what's needed.
That's correct.
Okay. Do any other board members have any comments with regard to the site observations?
I just have one more, which is really more, not specifically to the site visit, but just in continuing to look at the picture and having now been to the site. So the design of the houses really isn't in keeping with the rural nature of the project, right? So in my opinion, something more farmhouse-like, more house-like, less barracks-looking would be more in keeping with, you know, like a set of residential farmhouses that are joined together instead of something that looks a lot, that would look warmer and more charming to a neighborhood, more like a neighborhood itself. This doesn't really look like that.
Well, I don't know, I a little bit differ, having spent a lot of time in New England. Some of the styles here do look like New England, but what's different, I think, is there's a number of similar buildings all close to each other.
Well, I'll just finish my comment by
Yeah.
saying, I don't think it's in keeping with the way typical developments in this town look, which is what we're talking about, not in New England. So this doesn't look like a typical Holmdel development, which maybe would have more of a farmhouse style or a softer kind of character.
There's not
And,
too many farmhouses anymore in Holmdel. But, okay. Sandy, do you folks want to comment about
Yes.
the site visit?
Yes, thank you very much, members of the board and Mr. Chairman, members of the public, staff. Good to see you all. Thank you very much for having us in December. And we tried to anticipate what your comments would be, and it might be more prudent for me to rely more so on the memo or the notes that we received today, because based on that, I think we guessed pretty well, and we anticipated. There were a couple comments that I heard tonight that we didn't anticipate, so we weren't planning to, we can't address everything that we weren't aware of. But I'll make some quick representations about what we plan to do tonight, so you can see where we're going. I'm going to start with our landscape architect, and dealing with the notes, and it indicated that some board members were concerned about landscaping of the buffer area to the north. So Jeff Roach he's going to key in on that, and that's why we started with this. This might look somewhat familiar, but it's a revised plan, and in a moment I'll have those slides, there's 6 of them, marked with the help of Loretta. So in terms of the question about berms, one of these slides deals specifically with that one. In terms of the landscaping on Red Hill, we anticipated that, and you will see a much further enhanced landscaping area all along Red Hill. I'm not sure exactly where the interface of Van Scoy.
Nobody does.
But it's all along that frontage there. We'll address the question about the fence, and Jeff is here to fill in a couple of the other details. He'll talk a little bit about the question about the foundation plantings as well. So hopefully you'll be satisfied based on our thinking about what you would like to see. In terms of Bob Bucko's question about emergency access, we do have Hal Simoff here again, and he will talk about a suggested plan based on comments, a meeting, I believe it was, between Bob and Hal, and hopefully that is acceptable and amenable, and it will satisfy any concerns along those lines. In terms of the question about the housing and the like, well, I don't have our main architect here today. He's not in Europe now, which is good. I will ask him to come back at the next meeting so he can address those comments that you've made. Again, for the record, he testified. His name is Dave Hoagland. He's chief architect for senior living plans for Perkins Houston, and hopefully he will be available at the next meeting to address that. I don't want to even try to have Hal Simoff. He's not our architect. Last time I think he had some questions asked of him that were architectural, and he's just our professional engineer for the site plan. In terms of the question about retention detention. Hal is happy to talk to you a bit about that. I know there's different concepts on what's better, what's not. I think some people like one, some people like the other, but in the end, you'll be able to judge that. So I think without further ado, it would be prudent for me to now ask to have Jeff come up. I think everybody was here when he testified before. Is that correct? So is it fair to say we don't need to have him qualified again? He's still under oath. And so, evening, Jeff. Say hello to everybody.
Hello, everybody. Good evening.
All right. Now, remember, Jeff, when you were first here, you presented a plan which some people didn't like. Some people did. But then we all heard feedback. We heard about different options. And you're here tonight to discuss an alternate plan. Fair to say? Yep. So if I could, Loretta, I'd like to have this sequence slide. Date 10, I believe we're up to. And if I could, I'd ask just to spread that around. I represent what you're seeing are copies in paper of what's going to be up on the board for everybody else.
Does this replace the original one we got?
No, it doesn't replace it. This is a separate one, and in some respects you'll find it does replace it. But some of the original components, Mr. Vice Chair, are still in effect, and he'll explain that for you. Okay, Jeff. So would you?
So I guess the note is there's a new date on the first page. So. Of tonight's date.
Yeah, the one that was given Loretta has today's date on it.
Yeah, this does.
Loretta 810? Loretta 810?
Yes, it's 810. All right, Jeff, go ahead.
Thank you. One comment about the architecture. I'm certainly not the architecture for this project, but I mean, this is a rendering that sort of shows the general massing of it. So I would argue that the details of the architecture, Dave could probably show a lot better than what you see here. And this is just a sort of a simple version of what the overall site looks like. So I'm just asking you not to react too much to exactly what the architecture is here. But for me, it's about the landscape. So if you remember, this was the plan we showed.
And just for the record, so you flip now from the first sheet and you're looking at the second sheet, or you might call it a slide.
Right. So this is the original landscape plan, and if you remember, I'm sure you remember, we proposed a buffer along the northern edge. Is this thing showing up? Which I wanted to treat like sort of a natural woodland. So it's mixed deciduous, evergreens, and in various sizes.
And just for the record, sometimes I have to interrupt because the record can't necessarily reflect details. So the northern part is at the top, is that right?
Yeah.
And so you're looking at the line that goes across the top, which is the northern perimeter of our site, right?
I guess this is showing a little bit.
And to the, beyond that, those are the few houses within Country View that can see our site, right? Okay.
So we proposed that buffer. As you see here, 71 mixed species of trees. The interior was about 67 trees, but that's going to be much further developed later on. I know there's a question about the foundation plantings. This plan was not intended to show all the detailed plantings on the inside. This was mostly about the trees that would be around the outside of the development. And we had, as you can see here, 49 trees that were along the western edge, along the parking. It was just intended to provide shade and shelter, and break up the massing of that, but not necessarily to be a dense buffer along that edge, which faces the Garden State Parkway. We had proposed clusters of trees just sporadically around the outside, again, just to break up the massing of the buildings as you would view it from Red Hill Road. And I have the note on here that we wanted to try to restore the disturbed areas to try to preserve the natural sort of pastoral character of the site. So that was going to be just meadow grasses and wildflowers. And at that lower sort of southern corner, we're preserving 15 existing mature trees. Not much is going to happen down there, so all those trees will be preserved. But I heard at that meeting, and I've heard since, based on your site visit, that there was a lot of concern about the buffers, particularly the one along the northern edge, and how to make that more substantial, as well as buffers along the parking lot and perhaps along Red Hill Road. So this is our revised plan based on trying to respond to those questions. And here you can see we've incorporated those residences. You can see them up along the top. So that's where those houses are, just north of the property line there. So instead of, I mean, what I did here was that a lot of people felt they just didn't want to see, in particular from these residences, they didn't want to see these buildings. And it's true that they are up a few feet higher. So what we're proposing now, instead of the 71 trees, is a solid evergreen screen. And it's 124 evergreen trees that extends now for about 700 feet. And the limits of it were to really try to block any possible views from these residences. You can see the one in the upper right, one in the upper left. Block the view of those residences of any of the buildings in the new project. And in addition to those trees, we're proposing, again, so it doesn't appear from a distance as just a solid evergreen screen, we're proposing to put in another 35 trees that would be much more woodland-like. So there'd be shade trees and flowering trees along both sides here, just to try to block the massing of that screen. But what we're proposing here is 3 different species of evergreens. They'd be planted 12 feet apart in the row. And I think to really be sure that you're not going to see through it, it really does have to be pretty even. I know this looks very even, but I think if you're not going to give it a natural woodland character, which would, you know, allow for views through it here and there, if you really don't want to see it, it really has to be a pretty solid screen. So that's what we're proposing.
What kinds of species are you thinking of?
What we're proposing are Norway spruce, white pine, and green giant arborvitae. And we're trying to make it so that it's just not a solid screening, one species. So those are 3 different types.
And Jeff, would you describe a little bit how quickly those evergreens grow on an annual basis?
Well, in good conditions, they can grow 3 to 4 feet a year. I mean, I've assumed they may be 2 to 3 feet. That's fairly typical in good conditions, but they could grow more than that.
My concern is with the native deer population. They tend to decimate arborvitae, especially the lower 6 feet.
Yeah.
So we often end up with lollipops.
Yeah, there are different kinds of arborvitae, is that correct?
That's right.
Jeff?
Yeah, there are.
And some are resistant to deer. So
That's
would you
right.
describe
I don't know about the green giant.
Jolly greens?
I don't know.
Not
Yeah.
the jolly part, just the green giant.
Oh, the green giant? Oh, all right.
Because they grow very tall and they grow very quickly.
And would we want to stipulate that those are the types?
I can't say for certain. I'm not sure what the experience is. We've had good luck with those, but I can research that more.
Yeah.
And we're open to other species. There could
Sure.
be more than just 3. But we're looking for evergreens that, for one thing, they're native. The Norway spruce is not, but the other 2 are native plants. And they're pretty hardy, and we've had pretty good success with them. But again, that's open to discussion. If we find something that's better, we're happy to do that.
What caliber trees are you planting?
Well, these, we're proposing they start out at 6 to 7 feet and in height. Yeah. Evergreen trees are usually by height, not by caliber.
And let's talk about the timing of the planting. So assuming we received our approval, it's about a year building schedule, right? When would we plan to plant this so that we could start the growth for the benefit of the immediate neighbors?
Well, ideally, as soon as any earthwork that's going to be done in that area is completed.
So we wouldn't wait for the completion
plant right away.
of the construction. As soon as the planting would permit, we would stipulate that we would start the process so that before there was any occupancy, that we would start that, I would suggest a rapid growth.
Yeah, I mean, undoubtedly, this construction will be in stages and phases. However, but, the areas around the parking lot, et cetera, where there'll be construction activity there, it probably makes sense to do that later. But for this, the residential buffer, which is a bit more isolated, if one does that earlier, that would be advantageous.
Thanks for clarifying that. That's what I meant. We're talking about the northern tier. He's gonna talk a little bit more about Red Hill and going down to the parking lot next. Also, let's talk, before we go on to Red Hill and the like, talk a little bit about the concern about the topography. I know it comes under Hal Simoff's testimony a little more, but the views that were observed by our board members, is that going to change based on cut and fill? And how does that relate to what those plantings will look like and how they will buffer the neighbors?
I don't think the view will change. Hal can talk about the cut and fill more.
Okay.
I think this is at more or less the existing grade. It's going to be leveled off somewhat, but I think it's more or less the existing grade. I think 244 or something like that. And I think the grade, the property line is around 236, but it also slopes from east to west. We're proposing this screen to be further up the slope, so it's going to hopefully screen the buildings as much as possible and give some sense so it's not a solid evergreen screen right along the property line. I was also talking about the spacing. So they're 12 feet apart, and the rows are 15 feet apart. So that'll give the trees room to grow, so they won't be tied up against each other. But the rows would be staggered, so in effect, the trees would actually be 6 feet apart. So I think these trees probably, when they're planted, are going to be more or less 5 feet. So this is almost going to be a solid screen when it's planted. But there is going to be room for each of these trees to grow up and get to its full potential. We did also, along the western property line, along the parking lot, we've added more trees there. I think there were 49 before we're now putting in 72. There seemed to be some concern about screening that edge as well. And then along Red Hill Road, where we had not proposed plantings at all, except for the meadow grasses, we're responding to that concern as well and suggesting 60 trees. Now here, I still feel that to try to keep the character of the site, it would be better if this could be a mixed buffer. So it wouldn't be a solid evergreen screen. It wouldn't look like that. It would look much more like a natural woodland. There may be glimpses here and there through those trees, but I think they will grow together to be a pretty solid screen. And they would be deciduous and evergreens mixed together.
Just out of interest, when you go to the northeast corner, that's where some of the deep locations are in terms of topography.
Yes.
Yeah, and so
lower elevations.
Yeah.
Yes,
So is that why you didn't have trees or plantings in that area, or is there another reason?
In the northeast corner? Oh, northeast.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. No, well, that's as we've said from the beginning. As much as we can, we're trying to maintain the sort of open pastoral character of the site. Mm-hmm. And that's one part of the site that the buildings are far enough away we could still do that. And they're quite steep slopes over there. But we're trying to keep that open. So
You're talking about the side towards where the parking lot is, right?
No,
it's going.
upper right.
Upper right on the screen.
Yes, northeast corner. I mean, to a certain extent, that's true over on the northwest corner as well. It's more wooded over there now. But wherever we have open, essentially grassland, we're trying to preserve that if it's not going to be disturbed. And where it is disturbed, we will replant with meadow grasses. So we're proposing the trees where everyone thinks the screening should be. But otherwise, we're not trying to plant any more trees than we have to. We don't want to make this into a woodland. We want to keep it open pasture land if we can.
The parking lot side, let me interrupt you a second.
Yeah.
Where the parking lot side is, I'm concerned with people pulling in and out of those parking lot that the lights from their headlights are going to shine over, because that's up on the ridge, going to shine onto those cars. So why not continue that green line towards the parkway?
I
to
have
the
a,
parking lot?
I have a partial answer. You have to listen to Hal because of the conversation with Bob Bucko and how that's where we're going to propose an alternate entrance there. We have a diagram to show you.
No, I'm
if you're
not talking
interested.
about, I'm talking about, and when I know it's.
Oh, okay.
The top of
I'm
this
sorry.
parking lot, this space
Oh,
here.
I see.
To the left of the complex towards the parkway and parking lot.
Well,
In front of,
You
there's a
mean the
gap.
end of the parking lot?
To the end of the parking lot, towards the rear of the property, closer to the neighbors, on the parkway side of the site. That area has no trees at all being planted, according to what I see here.
well, maybe I'm not understanding. The trees extend up beyond the end of the parking lot, is that right?
I think you,
I'm not talking about the trees along the border between the parking lot and the parkway.
Right.
I'm talking above it, towards the neighbors in the back.
Well,
beyond
yeah.
beyond the emergency access road?
No. Yeah, beyond the emergency access road in the back. I don't know how I could show it.
Well, no, I
Evergreen,
understand.
the
He's got
Evergreen.
it.
You're referring to the Evergreen Road.
Excuse me?
You're referring to the Evergreen Road.
Yes, the Evergreen Road, it looks like railroad tracks back there.
Okay, well, that corner, we didn't plant, again, partly because we're trying to maintain the open pasture land as much as we
Yeah.
can. And there are, you can see the darker green up in that corner, up in that triangle.
That's the
That's
woodland.
all wooded up there. So the one residence there is quite far away.
So your testimony is that somebody pulling into that parking lot at night at 5 o'clock when it's dark, their headlights are not going to reflect onto those homes?
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
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 It's 50 feet elevation difference.
Now, the question about the berm, I've heard the issue of the berm.
Just for the record, we've now flipped over to the next
Yeah, sorry.
slide. It says planted berm at the top left. Go ahead.
And I'm not a big fan of berms. I think typically they're not a good idea. And the main reason is because the trees, especially with trees, sometimes with shrubs it's not such a bad thing. And if you are close to what you're trying to screen, a berm can be helpful. But with trees in particular, you're raising them up above the net normal grade. And the trees don't really want to be up there. So they're on a berm, the sides slope down, and it means that the root ball is much more susceptible to drought. For one thing, water runs off of the berm. And not much gets retained in that. So the trees, the roots really want to be down in the main, at the main ground level, because that's where the water is. And a berm really sort of exposes it. So it's very much more susceptible to drought and to heat in the summertime, and also to freezing and thawing in the wintertime. That's also not, root balls freeze typically in the winter and they stay frozen all winter long. But if they're exposed to rapid sort of freezing and thawing cycles, that can be very damaging too. So raising the trees up is not necessarily a good thing for the trees. As I said, the second note there is, I think it can be effective if you're close, if you're like near a shopping center and you want to screen out the parking lot. You could do, for one thing, you're only trying to screen up to eye level more or less in the heights of the car. So you could do a 3-foot berm, you can put shrubs on top. Shrubs would probably do a lot better on a berm than the trees would. And that'll screen quite effectively. But in this case, at least along the northern edge, the trees are 100 feet away, 150 feet away, and a 3-foot berm is really not going to do all that much. And as I said in the bottom note there, that represents essentially 1 year of growth. So just moving the planting up a year gains you those 3 feet. And it's not, I don't think it would be feasible to do anything much higher than 3 or 4 feet. It just isn't the room to do that. And I'm saying, at least on the northern edge, this double row of trees is going to be 15 feet apart. The berm would have to be beyond that. So the berm is going to have to be 30 or 40 feet wide. And if it's the length of the buffer, that's 700 feet. So in any case, those are just some thoughts about the berm. But I think it really would not, yes, it would raise these plants up at the beginning 3 feet more, which I think is not all that substantial. And you can make that up with a year's worth of growth. And in fact, if they don't thrive, they may be worse off. So those are my thoughts about berms. You were asked about the planting detail.
Again, just for the record, you flip over to the next slide, and it says typical detailed planting plan, right?
That's right, and I just saw that note this morning, I'm sorry, but we have developed, in response to that question in the original engineer's report, more detailed planting plans. We put a typical one on our detailed sheet here, which is what I'm showing. So I'm not exactly sure what it is you're looking for to review, whether it's the species. We haven't even gotten to that point yet. But this plan in the center, I know it's small, but maybe you can see it on the sheet, shows sort of the density. But as I think I said in the earlier presentation, we're trying to make each of these courtyards thematic in some way. So the one we're showing here is birds and butterflies. So there would be there'll be flowering trees, there'll be a few shade trees, and shade trees are really the only ones that we showed on the big illustrative site plan. We haven't shown any of the detailed plantings.
And why is that?
Well, partly because at that scale, we're showing the whole site. At that scale, it just wouldn't show up. And partly because the details of it have not yet been designed until the plan is sort of finalized.
Right.
But
so when would you normally do foundation plantings as part of a project?
Well, we do it at the end of design development and in construction documents.
Right,
So we
that
would
be
show
after
it,
an approval?
as we're doing here, in an illustrative way to show the sort of the density of the plantings, whether it be shade trees, whether it be flowering trees, whether it be perennials or grasses. But we have not developed the species yet. But
so would you agree that you would work with the professional for the board, whether or not it's Mr. Bucko or whoever would be assigned by the township to
I'm not sure exactly what you're looking for to review, but we're happy to supply it. But in any case, we had put this typical detail for that one garden on our sheet for the next submission in response to the comment the last time.
I guess in other situations, the board has received a complete planting plan before final approval. So that's, to my mind, you're saying you intend to do this.
Yeah.
It's then a question of when does it fit into where in the schedule so that it can be appropriately reviewed. And I mean, you're a professional landscape architect, so you would have some idea on what are appropriate species to use, but every now and then we find inappropriate things showing up, and the reviews help clean things up. But at some point, that should, the complete final landscaping plan should appear prior to construction.
That's correct.
Oh, yeah.
And what we would do is during the, let's assume that if the application is approved, then it would be part of the review of resolution compliance.
Yes, and we're happy to.
It would be part of the resolution, and that way they would have to comply with that before the board would sign off on the plans.
And that would be our anticipation based on other projects that I've been involved with, and that's what Jeff's confirming, is that right?
Yeah. And in fact, I mean, if that's, I wasn't exactly sure what the interest was, but we could certainly provide prototypical plans like this and a species list. So even if it's not every plant has been tagged, quite a few plants on this plan. But we can submit a list of species, and if you object to some of those, we can change those.
I mean, just always come back to one instance where a proposal included a tot lot and was being surrounded by barberry, which is an invasive, not permitted species and is inappropriate for little kids. So it's, mistakes happen.
Yeah, no, that's
and better to catch it before you planted it.
Right. No, and these would all be reviewed by our landscape, our landscape architect when they submit the revised plans.
Fine.
Okay.
And you're flipping over to the last page of the slides, right?
Which are the conclusions we came to the first time around. We are still trying to maintain the pastoral character. It's As we add more trees, that gets a little bit harder, but there are places, I think, where we can keep that, that sense of openness, at least partially on the site. Now we're providing, actually, I think 402 trees on our plan schedule, so it's almost twice as many as in the initial submission. And as before, we are trying very hard, and with these planting plans, to create these residential neighborhoods that are safe and interesting and familiar for the residents, so that as much as we can, that's what we're trying to do, but make it very comfortable and just a nice place for them to engage with nature as much as they can. And again, I don't believe there are going to be any negative impacts, especially now that we've enhanced this buffer. It's a very dense evergreen buffer along the northern edge, and we've added more trees and buffering along both of the edges of the property where the construction is relatively close to the adjacent property lines. And we are proposing substantial new plantings of trees and shrubs, perennials, especially
Before you talk more about your professional opinions, there was a mention about a fence. So I know that it's an area that might span between your efforts and the efforts by Hal Simoff. But are you generally familiar with the existing fence along the northern border? You understand that it's been up there and it prevents the present animals from going into the neighbors.
Right.
And you understand it's the present plan of the applicant, the United Methodist Communities, to maintain that fence the way it is. And why would that be?
Well, it's part of maintaining the existing character of the site. It's a wire fence that keeps the animals in, but it's pretty transparent. They're big openings, and you don't really see it much in the landscape. To replace it with any other fence is going to be much more visible, and to me, much more out of character with what the site is.
Okay. If you could go back to where you were before I interrupted you.
I think I'm done. The neighborhoods?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought I talked about that.
Well, you did, but we have a slightly different plan now. So.
Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, the village concept is still the same. It's consistent with what this community is proposed to be, and we're trying to reinforce that with the landscaping as much as we can, but also to make them different and distinctive. So each of these groups of buildings will be in a neighborhood that has similar plants, but they'll be organized in different ways, perhaps different colors, to try to create a distinct environment for each one of those neighborhoods.
And at the bottom there, you indicate an improvement of the site. I know you basically talked about that, but would you go over it again?
Okay. Well, I mean, the improvement is that we're just trying to plant, as I said before, we're trying to plant trees where they can be useful. If it provides shade in the parking, now in some cases, if it provides screening, we're putting trees there. But we're not trying to turn this into a woodland. But otherwise, and in particular in the interior of the enclave, we're trying to make this as diverse and interesting and colorful as possible. And primarily native species. In the interior of these neighborhoods, there will be some certainly ornamental plants that are in there for color and interest. But most of the perimeter plantings, as I said, the Norway spruce is not native, but it's very common here. But most everything else, the shade trees, flowering trees, and the other evergreens are all native trees.
And in terms of the numbers of trees and the details, as you've testified to, you recall Mr. Blumenthal talking, I believe it was last time, about the intent of the design standards that were listed, for example, in Kate Keller's report, dealing with maintaining woodland. And are we taking bulk numbers of trees down at all?
No, I mean, I think there were at least 6 trees on the site. Most of those actually are out. If you were out there, you saw the trees that were out sort of in the center around the buildings. Most of those, I mean, they have to be taken down because that's where the new development's going to go. But those are mostly ailanthus trees, which are considered weed trees. But the nice trees in the southwest corner, there's some Norway maples down there and some walnut trees. Most of those we're keeping in that one corner. Not much is going to happen down there.
So in light of that fact and the comment statement before about the intent of that design standard, do you think that a waiver of the design standard is even relevant, considering we're not taking woodland away?
Well, especially if you're trying to preserve the openness of the site as much as you can. So we're planting trees where you think they're appropriate and where they serve a purpose, but we're not trying to plant them to get the numbers up.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I think we've answered all the questions that our landscape architect could do based on all the questions that we've heard. I would suggest, especially since it impacts some of the immediate neighbors, if we could ask for questions or the like, so we can see if there's any satisfaction or
Fine. Were you going to have Hal also?
Yes, yeah, Hal is ready to proceed after the board. And
fine. Just one question which sort of crosses the line between the two. That the question of retention versus detention. They're technically different, but there's also a difference in the landscape appearance and how they get planted and the like. Do you have any comments on the difference from a landscape architectural perspective?
Well, the way, I mean, Hal and I talked about this at the beginning, and rather than doing one large basin, Hal's tried to sort of spread out the detention in what are basically large swales. I don't think these are going to look like big holes in the ground. And we're going to be planting them with grasses and wildflowers as well.
And why is that? Why would you plant?
Well, it's typically what I would do to try to disguise the fact that it is in fact a detention basin, to make it look like it's part of the natural landscape.
And also that helps the absorption.
Yeah, oh sure, of course. But I don't think these are going to appear like big holes in the ground. I think they're going to be swale-like, and you'll see them. But yes, we'll be trying to plant those edges as much as we can.
Would you think they'd be aesthetically pleasing or not?
Oh yeah, I think so.
Okay. Do any board members have any questions about the testimony we've heard and the responses we've gotten tonight?
I have a question, and it's revolving a little bit about the fencing. You mentioned there's some fencing there, and you're just going to leave it. What condition it just, I know you're trying to say you're going to try and preserve the pastoral effect of it, but it isn't anymore if you put buildings on it. So I'm concerned about this fence. And should there be some different fence put in? If it's not a farm anymore, there's no animals we're trying to protect from getting out. So perhaps that fence should be looked at as even more of a buffer for those neighbors.
Yeah, I would suggest that the neighbors chime in on that to see what they want.
Right, but I'd like for that to be that we could get, I have no idea what that fence looks like.
But I do think the edges of the site are still going to have that character. And what we don't want to do is there where we have the existing pasture land coming up to the property.
Mm-hmm.
On the northern edge, for example, will be 70, 80 feet or so till you begin to have a new planting. We'd like to keep that dimension, whatever it is, more or less as it is, and not start disrupting the edges.
Okay.
So if the existing fence is there and people are happy with it, we have no reason to take it out.
Right, I would agree with you. Yeah, it's just I don't know, and I think it's up to the neighbors.
Is the existing fence complete and fully along the entire property line?
Yeah, go ahead. I was just going to say, where I've been, it's intact, and it looks like what you'd expect it to look like.
I mean, frankly, I suppose you could just take the fence down because you're not going to have cows and bulls out there. But again, I would defer to the immediate neighbors to see what they want.
Okay, yeah.
I don't think they want a stockade fence out there. I
No,
don't
that's
think
why
they-
I'm not here to
Right.
suggest to
Post
put a
and
big,
rail fence.
yeah.
We're happy to yield to
Dimitri, you had a
what
question?
the people who are going to look at it
Yes.
would like.
Yeah.
I have a few comments on your testimony. Number one, you mentioned a couple of times that you're trying to preserve the open space. I think from what I see here on the plans and plus what I saw when I walked the property, that's not happening. Whether you put trees there or not, there's no open space. Between Red Hill Road and the buildings, there's basins. There's might have been 50 feet of grass that might have been left, but once you put in your basins, there's nothing there. So when you say open space, I disagree with that. There isn't going to be any left as far as I see. So now you have a choice. So if there's not open space, then what are we trying to accomplish? Do we want to screen these buildings or do we want to look at the buildings? Because we can't do both. If we're not doing open space, that's gone in my book. I don't see anything except for the one area on the steep slope on the top of Red Hill, which you can't see anything anyway over there. So that means choice two would be to screen the buildings from all the residents that are driving up a Red Hill Road and getting off the Parkway, and also the neighbors in the back. So that should be the goal. Yes, this wasn't a woodland property in the beginning. It was open field, but that's going to be gone. So what do we want to see there after it's gone? We want to hide, in my opinion, hide those buildings and camouflage them so they're not visible to the gateway of our town. This is, to me, a major intersection of people coming off the Parkway and looking at these buildings. And I feel they should be screened however we come up with it, and it should be a combination of evergreen and ornamental trees, similar like we have down Holland Road in the spring where they're all white. I'm not sure what species of trees those are. Pears. But in other words, something that enhances, so when you come off the Parkway, you can say, wow, that really looks nice. You know, not just what I see here. I think we got a long ways to go. It's a start. You definitely improved from the first version that I saw, but you got a long way to go. You're about a quarter into how I would vision this. I need to see, before we get to that point, some sort of elevations from Red Hill. So if I'm looking at Red Hill, I want to see an elevation of the site, where these trees are, with the caliber you're planning or the height of the trees, so that I can see what kind of screening it's going to look, and I'm sure the public is interested in that. And not that I'm not talking about the back for a moment, because those are a minority of the people. The majority of the people are going to be along Red Hill Road. So I'm really concerned how that's going to look. I think the back will get screened well. As far as the fence, I walked over to that fence. I'm surprised the animals don't get through that fence. It's all rusted, bent up, half down. To me, and I'm sure if there's neighbors here, they could speak on it. If they like it the way it is, that's fine. But personally, I think a post and rail fence would make it look more like a farm, you know, than a rusted old, you know, metal fence that's back there now. And I would include that with the entire site. If you're going to have it in one place, it'd be consistent to make it look like a farm with a nice, you know, a PVC type of post and rail fence. That's my vision of what a farm would look like, you know, and I would love to hear the rest of the board members what they would like to see, and also the public that lives behind the property.
I mean, I guess we disagree in what we observed in that, you know, as I walked around the perimeter at the outside edge of the emergency access road, I saw acres of grassland beyond that.
Yes.
The calculated coverage, I believe, is about 15%, no, 22%.
That's correct.
And that's a long way from 100%.
That's correct, Mr. Blumenthal. So as Hal can talk more about, if you look at our site plan, about 77% of the site is what we would call open. It's either pastoral, they're not buildings, they're not impervious, and as Hal can get into in more detail, you know, it's about 21.8, but the parking lot, which is impervious, I mean, that's as far away as you can get from any neighbor. We're happy to look at this again, but I must say that, I've been coming up this way for my whole life, and when I come off the Parkway, what I see directly ahead of me, it's a 3.55 acre separate parcel, which is commercial. And I see Mr. Potter's home equipment place. There's still a landscaping location. There's a dilapidated, uninhabitable home that goes back many, many years. And there's a barn that, I know there's different perspectives on barns, but I would say it's not very attractive, in my personal opinion. That's what I see. We do have, for next time, a composite to show you. We didn't want to overburden things tonight, but it will show you the new proposed entrance. And I hope that when you do see it, that you will be much more comfortable. In terms of the landscaping, well, you've just heard, we've put a whole line. I mean, if you don't want to see anything, well, I guess we could enhance it some more, but you've already heard our expert indicate such. Again, we are trying to, it is not a farm. Just to clear things up, the 15 acres of this 18.55 acre parcel is under what we call farmland assessment. It's a hobby farm. It has not been a working farm, a productive farm for many, many generations. We will back this up in coming next meeting or so.
Mr. Brown, when you come off when you drive in that area, with all due respect, you're completely wrong. When you drive in that area, what people notice are the animals on the edge of the property there. They don't notice the buildings in the back. It's the animals that are what catch people's attention. And I can tell you that from having countless conversations with people. So they're not looking in the back at the character of those buildings. They're not looking to determine how many acres are a working farm or not. The character of that property that's presented to the public at large is those animals, and that as a farm. That's how it is.
I appreciate that. And so you will also hear testimony to answer one of the other questions about the barn. So, for example, Mr. Potter, who has been at every hearing back here, he's been working with us to talk about the use. I mentioned working farm because it's not going to be a working farm. It will be representative, and you'll hear Cindy Jakes talk about how it's part of the therapy. It fits in. So I'm trying to give you a better feel, and I'm not trying to. I apologize if I gave my personal thoughts on it, but again, we'll present more, and hopefully the next time.
And I respect that, but then when you say something that's just completely, in my opinion, mischaracterizing things, I'm not going to let that stand.
No, I appreciate that. People have different perceptions. I mean, I've been driving there 50 years or so, and I apparently may look at it differently. I respect what you're saying. Absolutely, you're the judge in here. I'm just presenting. But again, as to anticipate more testimony, there are lots of uses that are permitted there, either because it's an inherently beneficial use, which is what this is, or you can have residential uses, and we're indicating that this, in our opinion, is a residential-like use at least, and you can have schools, public or private, you can have churches, houses of worship, I should say. There are different kinds of uses. So a farm could go away tomorrow, and it's permitted. And in our opinion, based on the facts that we'll clarify, especially through our planner, whenever he comes up, we will explain to you, in our opinion, why we have a right to be here. But I am getting a little far ahead. I apologize for saying that I saw.
I think it's good.
I see what I see, but yeah, I understand that people Beauty is the eye of the beholder, I guess.
Okay.
So anyway,
Every-
any other questions of our friend?
Before we go public, is there any other board members have any questions on the testimony we've heard so far?
No.
At this point in time. With that, your suggestion, I think we'll see if any members of the public have any
Yeah.
questions only on the testimony that's been given this evening.
No,
You
there
would
was,
like
for
to raise your
example,
hand
some
and come
people-
forward to the microphone, give your name and address, and identify yourself for the record.
A couple of our board members were saying, look, if they don't like the fence or like the fence, let us hear. So I don't know if this would be an opportunity to have them tell us if they like it or don't like
He
it.
has a good point. I mean, we're talking about landscaping. Why don't we go beyond our normal and allow the public to make a comment on some of the things we talked about, just so we can get a feeling?
Right.
Why would we have to wait until January or February to hear those comments?
You
Because
can
they
do
could be
that. If you-
working
if
on
the-
it
If the
right
board would
now.
like to do
Yes.
that, okay.
Does anybody disagree with me?
Just limited to the
The
testimony
landscaping.
tonight.
The landscaping we're talking about, not everything.
Sure.
That was all.
Right? Hi, Nick Pontecorvo, 6 Country View Road, directly adjacent to the property. Am I allowed to statement questions? I didn't hear that.
Limit yourself to
Landscape.
the landscaping as been discussed
But Nick,
tonight.
if you're gonna make a comment, I'm just gonna swear you in. So if you raise your
Just
right
raise your
hand,
right hand.
do you swear to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
It's gonna be testimony, we want to just have it official.
I guess my first question would be, is the current fence that's up for debate, is that serving any purpose in terms of securing the perimeter, or is it just mainly meant there just because it's there currently?
It's not necessarily meant to preserve or to protect, because
Keeps the
to answer
animals in.
one of the questions, we're not planning to have animals frolic out there. They would be limited to the area, so that when you come off the parkway, for example, you should be able to see the barn, and the area in front of there is the area. And again, we'll have that more clarified by Hal or others later on, but I hope that
Okay.
answers your question. We're not going to have any animals out by your
Okay.
house.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm speaking for myself. I don't want a perimeter fence. I think that having to look, I shouldn't say that. I don't want a different fence, stockade fence, vinyl fence, anything that's going to make it look fortress-like. What's there now is not in disrepair. I disagree with that. I can tell you that the animals don't get out, so therefore, I think it's doing a pretty good job. There's been, actually, if you notice, there's 2 sections of fence, an old one which was in disrepair, and there's a newer one behind it that's in good repair. We don't have any animals getting into our yard, which the prior owner had told me at one point was an issue. While a post and rail fence would, look nice as well, the thing that I think is most appealing about I shouldn't say appealing, what's most comforting about what's there now is it's just not very visible. Whereas a post fence would be. This has the posts and then there's wire there. So you don't really necessarily see the wire. Since it's not adding to any additional security, I don't really feel that a need for a larger, more secure fence would add any value. And frankly, I think it would actually hurt some of what we would be looking at. I will say maybe from the road, you don't notice the barns. From our development, you absolutely notice the barns. There's certainly a charm to an older, rusty barn with some farm equipment around. It kind of takes you back to when this was a working farm many, many years ago. But frankly, now you're just staring and looking at rusting farm barn buildings and traffic lights. Frankly, those traffic lights on the corner of Dwight and Red Hill are very visible. So I think one of the advantages of putting some sort of a landscaping buffer in there would be that it would limit, visibility from those. Another comment I'd like to make is while I would prefer that the farm stays, I think that most people would agree with that. I realize that the property has been sold. I also realize there were prior proposals and, for townhouses and even residential houses. So while we're comparing what would be visible for a 1-story single-family ranch-style house, I don't know that comparing that to what's currently there is the right comparison, since what's currently there has been sold and no longer going to be there. It's what could be there in its place. So while I would prefer to stare at a farm and animals, the next best thing would be a single-story building that should be able to get blocked by these trees. Whereas if we put townhomes or whatever other types of residential housing would go in that spot, 2-3 stories high, we're going to be staring at those. And there were prior proposals. Granted, I understand they didn't get put through, but that's not a guarantee that they won't get put through in the future. So, I don't think that having to see the very top of the roofs of some of these houses is the worst possible thing. I would like to see what the question would be, is the elevation of the property where the buildings are going to be going, is that going to be sitting lower than it currently is? Is it going to be sitting higher?
Hal will talk about that next.
Okay. And you guys, I guess to clarify, only 22% of the property is being developed with buildings?
Actually, it's less than 22% for buildings. The 22% comes about based on, I'll say, a different kind of interpretation. It's what the ordinance says is principal building, accessory uses, and driveway. That's the definition. That's how, and Hal can clarify this or confirm, but that's how the 21.8% is determined. But the actual buildings are less, and they're less by a fairly good percentage. It includes, for example, the walkways, which nobody's going to see, a lot of interior space, which again they're not buildings, but they're walkways so that the residents in there can walk from their homes into the bistro or the restaurant.
I mean, Holmdel's ordinances, like many, include a limitation on coverage, and that's defined as he indicated. It's primarily addressed on things like anything where the surface is permanently covered, and this then feeds into the stormwater calculation as to what happens to the runoff. So it's the area of the rooftops, all the parking lots, and the like. Okay. So that originally the emergency access road, if that's paved, that would count.
Got it.
So their original application had a number of like 22%. But if we make that pervious, then it's not going to count. So the calculation will change as these various parameters of the development change.
Understood. Do we have any idea what's currently developed on the property?
Coverage?
Coverage now? I mean, if you don't...
We can have Hal talk about that.
Okay, I don't know what the number is. My guess it's like 5%, but Bob, do you know?
No.
No.
Okay. I mean, I think that's a relevant comparison as well. I mean, we're not going from a pure, untouched piece of property to this.
Frequently, one of the biggest areas that adds is things like the parking lot.
Right.
And we haven't talked about that yet, and to what extent this meets the parking requirements or doesn't, and how much of it's overflow parking that could be done with pervious, for example. We haven't talked about any of that yet.
Okay. In regards to the berm, my main, the two main concerns that we've addressed in the past, and I'll say quickly again here, is the keeping the dead end closed on Country View and maintaining, a lack of visibility of the overall project. To the extent that the berm, may limit the ability of these trees to grow to the appropriate size, and then there could also be, I'm already dealing with drainage issues due to the elevation of my property. If there's a berm that gets put there and that leads to more water runoff, that's certainly a concern. The other concern about a berm would be, if trees are planted as suggested and at appropriate heights and the screen is built, then, it's going to look like a natural buffer, whereas once you have that berm in there and you're looking at the berm, it now becomes pretty obvious that it's just a very artificial structure that's trying to block the view of something that's behind it. And when you look at like what's going on or the berm that's in Roberts Road on the backside of Bellworks, it kind of looks a little funny to just see like some 4-foot, tiny arborvitae sitting on top of a very clearly unnatural mound. So that's something that, if we can get the coverage and the privacy that we all strive for without having to go through building a berm that, could cause drainage issues and certainly is not going to look natural, that's something that I think is favorable. at a minimum, what's being proposed on a landscaping proposal, including the timing of it, to the extent that these could be granted as a specific condition to a variance if one were issued on this property, that would be important. I'd like to, make sure that the landscaping is done first to try and shield us from dealing with the building, and also that the landscaping easement that was proposed at the last meeting be also a specific condition of approval, so that and I would ask the UMC, would you agree to that as a condition of the approval?
Do you want me to answer that right now?
If you'd like to, sure.
So I appreciate your comments, and hopefully what you've seen is what you and the other immediate neighbors appreciate, accept. And to answer your specific question, we will stipulate to a landscape easement, but especially based on comments by Jeff about the berm, which is a challenge, as I understand the requirements under the ordinance, we will agree to a landscape easement if we're not encumbered by a berm. And quite frankly, I did prepare a proposed landscape easement after the last meeting, and I understand that that's not Mr. Flieger's jurisdiction, is actually the township, but
The easement goes to the township.
yes, that's correct, and so I'm ready, willing, and able to send that to the township council whenever the board feels that it would be appropriate, and so we will take that burden, again, as long as a artificial berm, if you will, is not included, because we're worried about the depth.
Well,
Landscape has long-term.
I guess the one key step there is that next time there is a revision to the plans, if you could show the intended location of that landscape easement.
Yes, absolutely. I have that on the checklist, and at one point I thought about doing a visual on it, but it's going to correlate, if you look at the northern corridor, so it would correlate with the showing of the evergreen there.
Yeah, because there are ordinance requirements for such easements on both steep slopes and for buffers.
Okay.
Yes.
So I know you've been here before, of course, and thanks for your interest. I know you've been very concerned about Country View, and I have said at least twice, if not several times, that we would stipulate that we have no intention of entering any vehicular opening. As an aside, I think there's a hydrant under the road. If the fire department or the water department wants us to keep that in there, that's not going to impact you. But we have no intention of doing that. There was a mention last time, the time before, of a restrictive deed. If we get our approval, and if the township wants it, because that's the key for a deed restriction, if the township wants it, we will stipulate that we will execute it. And that's just a more formal representation of our intentions to make you and the other neighbors comfortable. And again, of course, if we didn't get the approval, we wouldn't sign it. But once we get our building permit, we would execute it, whatever the township wanted it, and hopefully that would.
So would that be a appropriate question for the zoning board then? Would you be willing to make a deed restriction a specific condition of approval on this?
Yes.
Well, the exact answer to that comes later. The process, we go through a hearing process. We haven't heard testimony of all the witnesses yet.
Okay.
Your planner hasn't testified yet. There are other witnesses that haven't testified yet. When we go through the whole testimony process, then there can be board discussion. Our attorney has been taking notes, and he usually diligently notes when the applicant agrees that they would stipulate to something. And after the formal vote at the end comes, then I move to approve subject to all the conditions. We don't generally list them out verbally at that point in time. A vote is taken. If it's whichever way the vote goes, then our attorney prepares a resolution that documents the vote. And it's that resolution that contains all the conditions. There are invariably at least 10 general conditions and 10 special conditions, such as including the fact they got to pay their taxes. They have to get approval from all the utilities and things like that. So that's where that comes in. That resolution comes back to the board, and that's what documents is what the actual approval of what they get is and what it's subject to.
Okay.
And then the construction office upstairs monitors them meeting those conditions. And until all of the, fine. And until all of those conditions are met, they can't get a construction permit.
Gotcha. Okay.
I mean, there's a couple of them that usually relate to, if they relate to the specific staging of constructions, where you get a construction permit for the first part, but maybe not the second. But all of that kind of stuff is part of the formal process.
Understood.
But your deed restrictions have been brought up several times. It will-
Okay. Yeah.
At
It's
the
in
time
your
there's a
no-
motion.
He's busy writing notes.
We will call out a few specific big ones.
Okay.
That the board's willing to obviously agree to that. That's going to be called out.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Minimally to resolve your concern. if
Okay.
nothing
I mean,
else.
you know, again, and so since you clarified some points on the landscaping easement, the purpose for us, when the board brought that up a couple weeks ago, we obviously, or the last meeting, it sounded like a good idea. The reason being because, again, not comparing what the UMC is doing to what's currently there, but to what the UMC is doing to who's behind door number 2 if this doesn't get approved. And part of that is the maintenance of this. So if we agree to the landscaping contingency or easement, then they have to plant it, they have to make sure the stuff stays alive, and when it falls or dies, then they have to do that. That's if the berm is going to be the trade-off where they won't agree to a landscaping easement because we want to put them in a berm in, and that again is another reason why I think there's a better way to screen this other than going the route of a berm. So I think that's an important thing to note there.
Another thing to be aware of, that it's even without the landscape easement, anytime there is a development that involves, well, construction and landscaping, the applicant is required to bond for the improvements, including the landscaping, and to include at least usually a 2-year guarantee. So they're just part of the initial package of what they have to do.
Now, we're very well aware of that, and again, the easement goes beyond.
Yes.
Well, the easement goes beyond 2 years, so
Because it's
10 years from now.
perpetual.
Okay. I guess someone else brought up a point about the existing tree line that's there. As I mentioned in past meetings, it's not a very robust tree line, and a lot of what is there is covered in invasive vines that, as a landscape professional, I'm sure you could admit that that's not going to do good things for the trees that are there for the long term. So would that be something as part of your process of planting it, you'd look to try and clean some of that invasive stuff out? And you know, with those existing trees, when they come down, if those remediation of the vines doesn't save them, are those included in what you would be required to repair in an easement scenario if some of those trees that are there fall? They're on your buffer, that's why I'm asking.
It's usually not that detailed.
Right, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
And landscape easements generally include permission to remove invasives such as vines
Okay.
and poison ivy.
And the board can,
Yeah, that
if they
language
want
is
to make a
specifically in
condition
your
to
ordinance.
at least clean the vines. I mean, we do that with streams, to desnag streams. And so it's up to the board again.
I didn't go and look what kind of vines they were.
They're big ones, yeah.
They're poison ivy, probably.
I've been trying to help take them off and save some of the trees. There's a good amount of poison ivy in there, I can tell you that.
Oh, I won't go there then.
Yeah. All right, I think that's everything I have. I mean,
Good.
you know, again.
Well, there'll be other opportunity for question and comment on other testimony, so thank you for your comments.
Nick, if you want, or other neighbors want, this is the language from the ordinance.
Okay.
Put it in a proposed easement. I'm happy to give it to you so that you and anybody else can take a look at it.
Yeah.
That's the concept, to correlate with the obligations under the ordinance.
Okay. Well, I mean, you know, again, assuming that this is going to get developed and we're not choosing between this and the farm, then what's been proposed for the landscaping and the timing of it, the way we're gonna, you're willing to do everything to block the views from our houses, I think that's something we're comfortable with. I'm comfortable with. I know I'll let my neighbors speak for themselves, but
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Anyone else have questions or comments on the landscaping? Please identify yourself for the record.
Good evening. My name is Vivian Stalakis. I'm here on behalf of my parents who live at 7 Country View Road. Athalia and Chris Stalakis, they've been there for 33 years, so we're right across the street from Nick. So I just...
I'm gonna...
Yes, I can swear.
You're just gonna tell the whole truth, not what truth, so yeah. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
So I just wanted to mention, you opened it up to comments. I appreciate it. Oh, into the mic. I'm sorry. Can I take it? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. So thank you for allowing us to make comments. I just wanted to say that we fully support everything Nick has said. We completely agree with everything. We've been speaking the entire time. We do really like the new landscape buffer. It really does provide a lot of coverage for our house, especially because our house is probably the most impacted on this street. A deed restriction, I think, is the most important thing for my parents and our family on the road. That's what we don't ever want to see open. And I assume, given the landscape, it's probably not something that's ever been discussed, right? That opening up that road in terms of access.
Well, it's been discussed here.
But-
as part of this hearing process.
Right, but not that anyone wants to open it up, correct?
Well, the question was raised in
Yes.
there, and the applicant's
Have said.
the applicant's plan was to not do it.
Thank you for confirming that. Appreciate that.
Just to clarify that, as we'll make it more clear, the Countrywood Estates was sold in 1967 by
Right.
the Potter family, and the developer developed it, and there's that stub road.
Yep.
And so it's just natural, it was intended, as we can verify, for a continuation of
Yep.
that. So what we're saying is that that natural continuation from that development is something that we would stipulate, promise not to go into or go out of. Okay?
Fantastic, thank you. So I did have, I think you answered a lot of the questions that I had already about the landscaping. I'd also like to mention that the fence that's there currently, as residents for over 33 years, we have had escaped goats in the past, but we haven't had them for the last 5-10 years since the fence has been fixed. We found goats and cows in our front yard many times. So I will say the fence does work. The new one that's there does work, and we really like it, and it's not really visible, so it's really great. The one question I had was about light pollution. So is that okay to ask that, or is no?
No.
No.
We haven't had any testimony
Oh,
about
got
lighting
it.
at
Okay,
all yet. so
fine.
that'll come.
So that's to come.
I can make a representation if you want to hear it. So that is under Hal's domain, but I don't think you want to hear the whole testimony. But we will affirm that there will be no lights that will go into anywhere near your property. The lighting plan, which will be looked at once again between now and the next hearing, between Hal and Bob Bucko, will, as you'll hear from Hal, it will not impact. There's no light pollution.
Excellent.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for your comments. Anyone else in the public have any questions or comments on the testimony on the landscaping this evening? Please identify yourself for the record.
Sure. Eric Silvergold, 9 Powderhorn Court.
And okay.
Just want to tell the whole truth, and let the truth so yeah.
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Thank you. We might be beating a dead horse here, even though I haven't seen a horse yet on the forum, but I'll beat it. So with respect to the landscaping plan, I see it doesn't show any entry points to Country Woods, specifically on Country View Road. So I just want to, again, get across your desire to make a deed restriction as a specific condition of approval, assuming the application is granted.
Yes.
Okay. And then, yeah, I appreciate the zoning board covering that, and would respectfully ask that you include that as a specific condition of approval in the final resolution.
And Eric, if the water company wants the water main, I think, under the street, so if they want it looped around underground, I mean, that's not going to impact anything you want at all, but I know Hal wanted me to just make sure, in case the water company wanted to extend what's already there, that wouldn't be part of the deed restriction, but it certainly satisfies, I think, any concern you would have. Okay.
There was some discussion about a second access point that came up today, I think with Mr. Bucko. Has there been, I think you mentioned that there have been some further discussions?
We're going to talk about that next.
Okay.
So we'll answer that for you.
And then that wouldn't be Country View Road, correct?
That's correct.
I know, I'm going to kill the horse. Kill it. So with respect to the northern landscaping buffer, just you answered a lot of the questions, and clearly the plan, particularly with respect to the north, has evolved significantly and is a lot better than when we last saw it. But when would you expect the trees to reach full maturity?
Full maturity? 10, 15 years.
10, 15 years. And you said at planting they'd be 6 to 7 feet? Is that right?
50.
Okay. And you think, given what you're showing there, that would adequately shield the adjacent properties from seeing any of the structures on the enclave? Is that accurate?
I think within 2 or 3 years, yeah. I think the trees within 2 or 3 years will be essentially the height of the buildings.
Okay.
And they'll be filled out.
But at planting, then, you would expect that adjacent properties would have visibility into the site?
You'd see probably upper portions of some of the buildings.
Okay.
And to maybe give you more comfort level, we will stipulate, as we discussed before, that we will do that planting to jumpstart that growth as soon as planting would be permitted. You know, we don't want to do it in the middle of the winter, but we're certainly, we would not wait until the CO is issued or anything like that, so that we can enhance what you're striving for.
Okay. So and again, I know this question was just asked, and I'll just second everything that the two prior speakers have said. I agreed with everything with Nick and everything that Nick and Vivian had said. But with respect to the planting timing, you had mentioned that just now and prior that you would consider planting prior to construction, assuming the season is correct.
We would plan to construct, well, so assuming we get the approval, and then we still have to make sure we satisfy the conditions, and we wouldn't be permitted actually to do anything out there until we satisfy the conditions. So the first time we probably would be able to do anything would be the first day that the building permit is issued. So as soon as we could do that, but the other, I'm just trying to clarify that, nobody wants us to go out there in the middle of winter, and so as soon as it would be reasonable to start that, it wouldn't be, at the end of the project. It wouldn't, and we can do that, and there's no construction in that area, so it wouldn't.
Okay, I'm just trying to understand the timeline. So you're, in essence, you're saying that you would plant those trees prior to other parts of the project, right?
Normally, the landscaping's done at the very end,
right?
So it doesn't get destroyed.
Well, exactly.
In this case, since there's no construction down there, we can plant it from as soon as we can.
Okay. And is that another thing that you would make a specific condition of approval to? And okay, so you recognize that comment too.
Correct.
Okay. So with respect to the infamous old fence, I live about 235 feet away, so the next row of adjacent property has been there for 22 years. I did have the pleasure of retrieving 20 or so goats on my driveway once or twice with the old fence. With the new and improved fence, we haven't had any issues. It kind of has this funky character to it that I don't mind. Frankly, I'd be happy to keep it. One person's view of fence is clearly different than others. I've been looking at it for 22 years. I have no problem with it. Happy to leave it there. Frankly, I would not want to see some grotesque large perimeter fence that makes it look like an industrial property that some people have proposed in my neighborhood. And also with respect to the post fence, I mean, I really don't want to see a white PVC fence, which I think would stand out significantly in that property as well. So just since you allowed comments, there's my comment on the fence. And I think you said you were indifferent on that fence?
Yep, whatever you want.
Okay. I mean, I would recommend deferring to the 3 adjacent neighbors more than, I'm close,
And the
but they're
applicant should-
closer, and they, they're happy with the fence too. With respect to the berm, I don't remember seeing that last time, but.
It wasn't.
It wasn't in there, okay. I agree with the comment that was made about the rather ugly berm that sits adjacent to Bell Works along Roberts Road. That's just kind of horrifying, but, it is what it is. I wouldn't want to see that put near us. And I would also worry about potential drainage issues if there were berms put near us, because we have drainage issues currently. So just a statement there.
Well, just a comment from me. I agree with you. The berm along Bell Works at this point is ugly and disturbing. There is another one on this side of Crawford's Corner Road down here where there's a residential development across from Bell Works. If you go past just past South Holland from here.
Okay.
That is a berm that's been landscaped, but it's been there 30 years. It disappears. You don't see the houses behind it. So there are situations where a berm
I'll be somewhere else in 30 years, I can guarantee you that.
So
maybe a lot sooner.
There are situations where a berm may be appropriate, but it takes time, and mostly what's on it are smaller trees and shrubs and not big trees.
Okay.
It's a question of time also.
I appreciate that, and I'll definitely go take a look at that.
In this case also, because of the length of it and where it is on the property, the impact on the drainage is real, because you're changing normally drainage goes downhill, and this would disrupt that.
Right.
And hence change the drainage patterns, which would have to be taken into consideration.
Yeah, and that's been one of our primary concerns.
There's another berm in front of the solar farm on Holmdel Road. Take a look at that one. And
But
you'll
that
get a
one's
good
not
idea.
as old, and it's not as grown up as much.
No, but there's a lot of dead trees on it now. So what looked beautiful at the beginning does not necessarily look so good now.
Maintenance is key.
Well, that's a good segue, because with respect to maintenance, and this was also just brought up, the concept of a landscape easement, to the extent that the use variance is granted, would be extraordinarily important to the residents of Country Woods, so that we have confidence that there would be the maintenance of that property, hopefully in perpetuity, 30 years, however long we're all around, but certainly well into the future. So it sounded like
Yes.
this time, I hadn't heard that before, but you're willing to concede to a landscape easement as a specific condition of approval?
Yes.
Okay. That was easy enough. And then with Mr. Flager,
We have that.
okay, so you had that noted.
Yep.
Thank you. Those are the major things. Just one quick question for you, Mr. Flager. Are interested parties to this hearing, like myself, for instance, able to submit a letter to the zoning board outlining our views and what we think about what's happening?
Have to be able to be here to be subject to cross-examination by the applicant or anyone else. So we need live testimony that the board can hear. So anything that's submitted, like a letter, is not considered. It's not evidentiary.
Okay. So you would reject any letters that were submitted to you as
Board
evidentiary
secretary
records?
put it in the file. They don't send it back to you, but it doesn't get submitted to the board members, and it doesn't get part of the record at all.
Okay.
So as a matter of fact, we don't consider anything that's not on the record.
I see.
We're not
Just-
supposed to.
That was just a purely hypothetical question.
Yeah, no, per state law, we're acting like the judge and jury, and it's considered quasi-judicial. We're not actually judges and a jury, but the process is similar, and hence everything is subject to cross-examination. So any statement you make, we can query you. Where did that come from?
Okay.
Our role is to get all the facts on the table to make sure we completely and correctly understand everything that's been presented.
Okay, I appreciate that.
If it gets reviewed by a court, they can see from the record what this board considered and how they came up with their decision.
I see.
Marty, couldn't he at the end, when we make comments, so-called read the letter into
Yeah.
the record?
If he's here, yes. Yeah, you
So
can
if
read
you're
it.
here at
Yeah.
the end when we open general comments and you have your letter and you read it out loud, that's the same thing as giving us a letter.
And subject to the time limits, you can, I mean, essentially you have your notes, or I see everybody has, and which is important, you don't want to forget something. So whether you do that in a, narrative form, or you just want to make sure you're outlined. Obviously, you can look at your notes and read, yeah.
Okay. Okay, I appreciate that. That's it from my front.
Thank you for the comments. Sandy, just one comment on something that slightly impacts what's been said. What do you anticipate the construction time period for this might be? I don't know if it's going to
1
be
year.
phased. 1 year?
Yes.
Approximately? Okay.
Yes.
Well, let's finish this, what we got right now. Yeah, do we have any other members of the public want to have any questions or comments on the testimony tonight?
One.
Are there any others who wish to speak tonight, just so we get a feel for who else might be standing up? Okay, go ahead. Please identify yourself for the record.
My name is Barbara Gallo. I live at 8 Fieldgate Court in Country Woods Estate.
Raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
I'm coming from a place of not knowing, so that's really why I'm standing up here now. But I know that there's a sewer pumping station that's going to be put in, and I was just told that it's not on this property, that it's going to be on Ben Shoy.
No.
We haven't gotten to any testimony or discussion about the sewage or the engineering of it yet. We will do so at another time. It's not part of the landscaping that we're
Well,
considering tonight.
I guess to me it was because I wanted to know where it was and what landscaping was going to be around it.
Mr. Blumenthal, I can in 30 seconds try to dispel this. I know it's something that's been floating around. So the issue of the sewer connection, which is on the last page of a 30-sheet submittal by Hal here, shows the route of the sewer connection. I think it was A30. But the jurisdiction to talk about the connection itself is not the boards. It is the townships, because the township happens to own and operate the sewer authority. I don't know why folks are, like good folks like you, are thinking that there's a pumping station. There is no pumping station any place along that route, which is in Van Squake. It runs. Eventually, yeah, thank you. I'm even Dutch a little bit. But anyway, so the pumping of the effluent from this project is based solely on a subterranean pump that is literally on the property. So if you looked at the top right on other plans, it will show, you can't even see it, but it's in that general area.
So it doesn't need landscaping?
Well, no, it doesn't, because you can't see it. It's under the ground.
Okay.
Okay? And again, it's detailed in house plans, but there is no plan pumping station at all off the property. And the reason why there is one on our property is just because it goes down and up. So it's about a 37 linear foot stretch from that end down Van Squake, and it goes down and up. So, yeah.
So we don't have to worry about landscaping? It's
Correct.
underground?
That's right.
Well, okay.
And it's all going to be done on your property?
That's a
Yes.
different subject and is not the subject of what we're discussing tonight, so.
Landscaping?
The whole sewage system, the
Right.
engineering of it is
My
not.
question was just,
it's-
did it need landscaping?
Well,
That
when
was
we
the
get up to the
question. The
sewer,
answer
then
is
we'll-
no.
When we get to
We'll
talk
address
about that
So
subject, we'll address it
I
then.
appreciate that, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there any other members of the public have any questions or comments on the testimony tonight? Seeing none, we'll close the public portion. Bob, did you have any other questions? I saw your hand come up a couple of times.
Yeah, no, just the fact that all of the concerns of the residents would all be reviewed to ensure that their concerns were properly addressed when they submit revised plans.
Okay, yeah, so our engineer has made note of the comments people have been making, and all of this will get codified in revised plans, and he will be looking at the revised plans to ensure they're consistent with the testimony that's been given this evening.
Correct, and it'll be in a letter report to the board.
Okay, good. Thank you, Bob.
But when you say letter report, that's your letter report?
Yeah, he regularly issues an engineering letter, which is up to 20-some pages at this point in time, and it's a cumulative letter that retains all prior comments.
That's correct.
And such copies of that letter, once they've been issued, are available at the clerk's office.
That's correct.
Board office upstairs here. Okay. Did you want to continue yet?
Yes.
A little bit, just onto the engineering aspect of the site visit?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
All right, so
Because
we'll
I think
ask,
the
Jeff to
clock's
sit
been
down.
running.
Yes, so.
Well, let me
We'll be
see.
as quick as you want on this, and to start in that fashion, I'd like to show Loretta what.
I have a question before you start.
Yes, sir.
Being it's 9 o'clock, and being that the next board, 4 new people will probably be here, is it, you think is this the right thing to do, is to go on to this, or hold off and wait?
What I would suggest is this. Since this secondary access has been such a prime matter, we can show it in 5 minutes or less if you want. And I'd like to address that directly, Mr. Vice Chair. So Hal, would you sit down, please? So I'm cognizant of the fact that this hearing obviously is never going to be done in 2021.
Correct.
Obviously, we have neighbors here, and I've been realistic. I also realize it's Hanukkah, and Christmas is coming up soon. I realize that months and months ago, we talked about a potential meeting on December 15th. However, it seems to me that it would be in the interest of the board members here and the board members who may be coming on, whoever that might be, at the reorg meeting in January, that they have a better opportunity to listen to live testimony rather than having to read an extra transcript or an extended transcript. So it's my intention to conform with what was desired for tonight and stop in 5 minutes if you want, maybe get instantaneous feedback if you like what is being shown, and end. We would agree, if whatever way you want to look at it, to extend this. We certainly agree to sign any documentation to extend the time until, I assume it would be the reorg meeting in January?
No.
Yes, well, we would
whenever
extend
we-
initially to the reorg meeting in January. Only at the reorg meeting does the new board adopt a calendar, so we
Yes.
don't have any official dates beyond that. At that meeting, we would then extend it to probably the first meeting in February, but that all has to happen with the new board next year.
Yeah, having been a board attorney for a fair number of years, I do that regularly with my boards, and I understand, I appreciate that. I didn't know if you with the new plan, if you plan to have a meeting in January. I know some boards have the reorg and then they have hearings. I understand, whatever the board is comfortable with, we're more than happy. But with that in mind, in light of the sensitivities and the balance, if it's permissible for the board to consider the fact that we have been before you for a long time, I don't know if you'd like to get rid of us or you'd like to, but we would. I think everybody here would like to expedite this so that while it's fresh in everybody's memory, including the new people, that we can have a decision in a reasonable time in the beginning of 2022. So to the extent that you can accommodate that, we would appreciate it. But we're here to go with the flow, to be responsive. And
I mean, none of us here can speak for the new board, and that's hence why we can't really say a lot as to how that's going to play out.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Simoff and I had discussions about the location of the emergency access. But I really haven't had a chance to really dig into it and take a good look at it. And Mr. Simhoff did express his opinion as to why he has this at this location. But I would like to have, an opportunity to sit with him, because after thinking about where it is located, I'd like to talk to him a little bit more about the location.
Fair enough. But let me, I think,
But if you
Mr.
want
Brown said he could let us, Hal, talk for 5 minutes and just give us his thoughts. And then you can subsequently meet with him, and potentially you and also the other township professionals, the fire chief, urgency, first aid chief, police chief, might want to consult with each other to see, because they're the people that are most concerned about using this kind of thing. But we're not going to make any decisions tonight, but I'm certainly happy to give Hal 5 minutes to give us his current thoughts.
Okay, I just wanted to make that clear to
Sure.
the board.
Absolutely. No, I don't think we're making any decisions about this tonight.
And with that in mind, again, this is one sheet. This is a new concept
Okay.
plan. And as the instructor test, you have seen Al was sworn in before, so I assume that we can just proceed without
Yes.
having a stand. Oh, you want to stand? Okay. And very quickly, to describe what's being handed out, which has been marked as A11, this is a concept plan. In terms of the landscaping, which is up on the screen, the landscaping plan is what we're relying on based on the testimony. What is being handed out is for just focusing in on this alternate. And as you'll see in a moment, it's going to be shown up on the road there. So Hal, with that in mind, please explain.
Hal, would you take the microphone? You don't speak as super loud as some people.
Yes, and for the record, we do have on the tripod.
They're coming. Got more, sir.
It's coming around.
There are about 12 copies.
So Hal,
May I approach the copy? Yes.
yeah.
Thank you.
So Hal, would you describe what's on the tripod, and would you verify is what's on the tripod exactly what has been handed out and what has been marked as A11?
That's correct.
All right,
And
so,
can you-
Mr. Chair, I don't know how you handle exhibits. Again, it's the exact same document, it's just been
That's
blown
fine.
up
That's
for visual purposes. If you want it marked, that's fine. If you don't want it marked, I don't feel there's a need for
A11,
that.
A11, we're gonna.
Yes.
You're going to mark the reduced?
Yeah, she's got it.
Okay,
Okay.
very good. So again,
Basically-
how focusing up on the road and to the left of the main entrance, is
Yeah.
that where you're proposing an alternate?
I'm proposing an alternate to enter the site on the southeast corner and come and connect with the loop road. The last presentation we made,
Yes.
the last presentation we made continued the loop road all the way around, and I think we got positive feedback on that. And then that was also plotted on the site visit. So there was a discussion of where to put the alternate access for the fire equipment, for emergency and fire. And I proposed to locate it about in the area where the existing house is. What we've done in this, what the revised plan is going to show is that there was proposed a sitting area in this area, but we're taking that out because really we have enough sitting areas within the site, and this is outside the fenced area, so it really has no benefit. Therefore, we can save all the existing trees that are in this area. And I propose that we propose it to be grasscrete or some sort of, so it matches the surface, and then connect at this point where the loop road is. And the reason for that is, I think the advantage is that rather than having the access someplace along Van Soik, this location for the alternate access or the emergency access gives you access, two ways of getting to this back part the back part of the loop, versus if you came in over any place over here and you entered the loop and you wanted to get to these units here, I think that, this would be a preferable location for the alternate access.
How did you do some studies in terms of radius for any emergency vehicle that would come onto the site?
Yes, we plotted the fire truck, and the fire truck can come in here and make the left turn, and then there's two ways of getting to the back loop, either in front of the buildings or through the parking lot. And then, and that's why, again, if the access is at this point, I think it gives us better access to the loop road at the northern.
I don't know how, do you want to say anything more about this today?
Well, that was my thought. And
Okay, so you simply wanted to share your thought.
Yes, the only other thing I would add, since we've talked quite a bit about it, is that the applicant will stipulate that the entire fire road that Hal just talked about, which is looped now, would be a pervious substance, and you're absolutely correct. There are a lot of modern materials, some of them called pervious concrete, pervious asphalt. There's a whole host of them. We would suggest that whatever the professionals would want in consultation, because again, there are various options, right, Bob? So whatever would be liked, we would agree to. And again, that would eliminate any expansion. Now, in terms of the EMT access, which we talked about before, if it's desired to have concrete, which would be an impervious concrete, whatever is desired by EMT in those locations that we talked about before.
First aid, we'll call it EMT, first aid.
First aid, and not EMT, okay. EMT chief,
EMS, if
captain.
you want to use EMS, you can use that terminology.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
But
Yes.
the comment that I have is that, please, Bob, speak to the chief of the fire department and chief of the first aid squad on the possible locations that you're talking about for the access.
Right.
And as far as the surface goes, I suggested it only where we're going to back up into the compound, not the entire roadway. So it might only be 10, 20 feet. That can be asphalt.
Yeah, and that's what I was referring to, because I remember what your comments were last time, and that's exactly what we're talking about, and whether or not it's desired to have it impervious rather than pervious because of whatever reason.
Rolling a stretcher.
Whatever is desired.
It makes it a lot easier when there's a patient on there, not to be going boom, 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 boom
Yeah,
with
sure.
the patient.
Yeah.
Now, but it may be the case that pervious or impervious as a hard surface would be fine, but again, whatever is desired.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, there's again, as Sandy has represented and Hal, that there are a lot of materials out there today that would be pervious, but the main concern would be that it has the structural integrity to accommodate the vehicles. And basically, we would be looking at the fire apparatus with the ladder truck, which have the most weight and the width of it. And again, in preliminary discussions with Hal, that the pervious material would then help out the stormwater management of the entire site. So that's the type of stuff we'll be looking at with regard to the surface, and it'll also take into account Dimitri's concern about the stretcher and any other equipment that they may need to carry out or roll out when they're called. And as far as the access road to where Hal has presented it, we'll take a look at that with the fire chief and the first aid to see if they, if that's the location that they'd be comfortable with. And let's assume they are, then that's but I'll probably come back and recommend to the board.
Good. Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting thought. I'm not the expert to know whether this is the right thing or not. Let's get the right people together. One person, one organization that I think you need to add to the list of those previously mentioned is Monmouth County, because this is a county road.
They're already involved with this.
Yes.
As far as review.
Yeah, so they've been, and I don't know to what extent the state with regard to the exit from the parkway.
No,
It's
they
not-
wouldn't.
Yeah.
The county required us to send plans to the state,
So,
and we got feedback from the state.
We received a letter back, did we not?
Yeah, in the interim between when I first drafted the plans and the subsequent drafting, the lane configuration changed.
so
So
anyway.
we had to redo the lane
Yeah,
configuration.
in terms of the material, I rely on engineers with the relevant experience, because there are things that are advertised as pervious that are not, and vice versa. And the appropriate structural requirements are also certainly appropriate, because if it doesn't work, it doesn't work.
Correct.
Okay. Sandy, do you have anything else for now?
No. Again, with the idea that I think we would like to get out here sooner than later, we can certainly stop now. We've answered all the questions that have been
Okay,
raised.
do any of the board members have any other questions on the testimony
I don't
tonight?
want to get ahead of them, but this is only going to be for emergency
Yes.
use.
Yeah,
It
and
would
part
not
of
be
the-
another road being opened up for the development. It's just
Well, there's
for
the main
emergency.
access that's paved and controlled at the traffic light.
Right, but this
And
is,
then, I would also
The answer to your question is yes.
But
But,
the treatment, how we control the emergency access.
yes, that was going to be my next follow-up.
Is subject to comment.
Yeah.
so the proposal is grasscrete to distinguish that. To go back to Mr. Blumenthal's comment before in the beginning, whatever flagging or the like that is deemed to be helpful to delineate that, to make sure people know it's not for regular access.
Right.
We're certainly happy to do that in consultation with Mr. Bucko to make it as safe and logical for flow as possible.
Okay.
Very good. Anybody else have any other questions or comments at this point in time?
I have one question. What kind of emergencies have you considered while designing this second access? And the reason I'm asking is, it is so close to the primary access that for any reason, if Red Hill Road is completely jammed with traffic, you lost both exits.
Well, the thought process was if the driveway gets blocked, would there be a secondary means of getting into the site? That was the motivation of this plan.
For emergency purposes.
Yeah, the consideration was not so much simply what I'll call traffic or even heavy traffic, but suppose there is an accident at one point and, car flips up and is blocking the entrance to this site. Now, and something else happens and you want to get emergency vehicles in, how do they get in?
That's the whole purpose of this
Second road.
this second access, is for emergency purposes only.
As a
All right.
member of the First Aid Squad, I can tell you that I've been there to both intersections, Dwight and the Parkway, for accidents, motor vehicle accidents. So it does happen. So I understand the location, but I'd rather see it further apart. I didn't want to get into that today, but I'm sure that's what the professionals will probably tell you.
Okay? Any other questions or comments? You're done? You're set? You're set for the moment?
If we are concluding, which I think is the point, I'd just like to thank everybody on the board for being with us this year. And for those who might not be here next year, if there are any here who aren't here, I want to thank you very much for your service. And next year, I'll thank those who are still here for listening to us. And happy holidays. And
So, thank you, and to be clear, we're going to continue this public hearing to January 12th without further notice to the public. January 12th is the reorganization
We
meeting.
want to accept these minutes.
The site notes? Okay.
Notes before we
And that,
close out.
note that there will not actually be a hearing on January 12th. January 12th is the reorganization meeting of this board, when new members will be sworn in, etc. And at that evening, they will adopt a calendar for the year. So we do not have any further date. The actual continued hearing would be some date after the 12th. But we can't set that date because we don't have a calendar for next year yet.
7 p.m. on the 12th.
7 p.m. on the 12th, here is the reorganization meeting of this board. The Township Committee reorganizes at 6 p.m., I think, on the 4th. That's the evening at which new members would get appointed to this body. And we did receive some draft notes for the on-site from Loretta. Can I have a motion to approve those draft notes? They're not really formally minutes.
I'll make a motion.
Is there a second?
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Her fan wasn't at the,
Okay.
No, it's not.
Oh, so you can't second
I
it?
wasn't there
I
yet.
second it.
Okay,
Fallon, Dimitri.
I second it.
yes. All in favor? Aye.
All right.
Opposed? Okay. Okay, we've, all right, so thank you and have happy holidays.
Happy holiday, yeah.
And we'll see you next year.
Say without further notice.
Yes, I think I said it without further notice to the public, continued to January 12th.
You don't want to sign it?
Yeah.
Okay, going on to item 3.
Oh,
You want to read this?
okay, I'm not used to that. Item number 3, 13 Fox Hollow Road.
Please, we're continuing, and we have another item of business here, so everyone would please be quiet.
You gotta wait for everybody.
Wait a moment.
Okay.
13 Fox Hollow Road, Dennis and Jillian Strong, Block 49.01, Lot 13, in the R40AZ zone. Applicant granted setback variance relief for a proposed pool 68 feet from Galloping Hill Road, where 100 feet is required by ordinance.
Okay, this is a hearing that was held earlier this year, and we have received a proposed resolution from our attorney. Did anyone have any comments on the proposed resolution?
Bless you. God bless you.
Do I have a motion to approve the resolution?
I make a motion.
Roll call?
Ms. Davin? Ms. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Hearn?
Yes.
Mr. Pesci? Yes. Mr. Banachopoulos?
Yes.
Mr. Blumenthal?
Yes.
And Ms. Latif?
Yes.
Item 4, draft minutes. We've received minutes from our Loretta for September 22nd and November 3rd. We'll take them separately. Is there a motion to approve the minutes of September 22nd? That was the evening of the first hearing on this application. Roll call? Voice on this? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion to approve the minutes of November 3rd. There was again there was the prior hearing on this application. Same thing, Anthony and Dom. All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Anybody? Kate, Bob, any other reports? Marty?
None?
Any other business for this evening? Our next meeting will be on December 15th. We have one backyard variance that we got, the materials on that were passed out tonight.
Yes, and just, it's a very simple variance, it's just a fence, so Bob and I will not be writing reports, and we'll be in attendance at that night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. No.
Lonnie will be here? Okay, because it is a variance situation.
Yes.
Okay, in that case, is for no other business, a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Second?
Second.
Anyone opposed? You're going to stay here. All in favor? Aye. Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.
Shut it down.
Oh. No, that went a little better than expected. The residents don't want to walk. They love the plan.